withdrawal from Iraq, unrest in Iran, unease in the Gulf Arab states. The Persian Gulf has long challenged U.S. policymakers, and that's more true today than at any time in history. How will President Obama's direct appeal to Arabs and Muslims affect U.S. foreign policy goals? What will the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq portend?
We have to have a long view, think of the region as a whole.
Can the U.S. and its allies prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon?
Their president makes statements which sound as though he is a religious fanatic, and religious fanatics are not deterrable.
Next on Great Decisions.
In a democracy, agreement is not essential, but participation is. Join us as we discuss today's most critical global issues. Join us for Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association, inspiring Americans to learn more about the world. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Star Foundation, Shell Oil Company, and the European Commission. Great Decisions is produced in association with the University of Delaware.
And now from our studios, here is Ralph Begleiter.
Welcome to Great Decisions. I'm Ralph Begleiter. Joining us to discuss power and politics in the Persian Gulf are Trudy Rubin, international affairs columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Ed Terzansky, senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and professor of international affairs at La Salle University. Thanks to both of you for being with us. You can't talk about the Persian Gulf without talking about the war in Iraq, obviously. Let's start there. Tell me how you see the war unfolding over the next couple of years, let's say. Trudy?
There are two possible ways things can go, either towards more fragmentation or, and I think this is a strong possibility, towards another dictatorship, a soft dictatorship. You see it now with Prime Minister Maliki, the man in charge now who people thought was a wimp. He has managed to put the army under his control. He has his own security service. He has taken control of the Special Commando Unit, which is one of the best units that we've trained in Iraq. And many of the other parties are afraid of what they see as dictatorial tendencies. On the other hand, if he loses in the next election, there's a fractious coalition that would have to put together a government, and even he may have to put together a fractious coalition because all the parties are splintering and forming alliances, some across sectarian lines. But bottom line, people in Iraq yearn for security, and I think they wouldn't mind having a better Saddam.
Ed, how about you?
I would agree that the future is likely going to be determined by what happens in terms of political accommodation. And the soft dictatorship Trudy talks about may be jarring to some people. But in instances where people have not had a usable democratic past, it's very difficult to get to the point where differences are settled principally through political discussion. It may be messy, just like Bismarck said, two things you don't want to see made, sausages and laws. It could be very fractious, but as long as we can get to that two-turnover test, once you've had two successive turnovers of power that have been relatively calm and free, relatively fair scheduled elections, your chances of proceeding down that line are much better than they are going back to what you knew before. Iran is going to have a lot to do with what happens in Iraq because its capacity for mischief is still quite pronounced, especially among the Shia.
It strikes me as interesting, actually, that we're talking about democratic elections in Iraq. 7, 8 years ago, nobody would have thought about that. And yet I think it's an odd contrast, Trudy, for you to be talking about the elections leading to a soft dictatorship. Does that mean that you would see the elections ending at some point, that they wouldn't happen again, or they would become essentially sham elections like most of the rest of the Arab world?
I don't think it's necessarily the case that there would not be a continuous series of elections every 4 years, or whatever the period is that the Iraqis choose. But I think there's such a yearning for order. There's such a yearning for stability. It's sort of like when the Soviet Union broke up.